more than 100 years, the telephone companies have provided wiretapping assistance to governments. For much of this time, this assistance was manual. Surveillance took place manually, and wires were connected by hand, calls were recorded to tape. But as in so many other industries, computing has changed everything. The telephone companies built surveillance features into the very core of their networks. I want that to sink in for a second.
What?
Our telephones and the networks that carry our calls were wired for surveillance first.
Okay, so at the risk of being pedantic, I want to repeat this again.
Companies built surveillance features into the very core of their networks. I want that to sink in for a second. Our telephones and the networks that carry our calls were wired for surveillance first and foremost.
So long before that video about the phone and about how surveillance technology has been built into our phones, and by the way, that guy really sounds like Geordie Rose to me. Long before the discussion about surveillance technologies being built into the phones, I was already having inklings of thoughts regarding the video wherein Dr. Sylvester Gates informs Neil deGrasse Tyson essentially that there are browser codes built into reality. And I never liked the idea of living in a simulation. I was never a proponent of it. So I'd been thinking about it for a while, and I came to some other conclusions. And this led me to watch the video again. Well, I came to these conclusions in more of a strong way after watching the video again. But the video commences, or one of the main videos online commences with the images that we see in the background, looking very much like two really early incarnations of UFOs. And it also commences with Neil deGrasse Tyson asking Professor Gates, "So, where are you? Where have you landed?" Which is kind of funny. So I don't know if that was an intentional tongue-in-cheek or not, but as we can see, the two images behind them look like UFOs, and Dr. Sylvester Gates would then go on to essentially describe the images behind him, saying that where has he landed, where has it taken him to these very strange images. And he says these are pictures of equations that contain all the informations of a set of equations related to string theory. And it's even more bizarre than that, because when you try and understand them, you then find that there are computer codes buried in them, like deep in them, just like you find in the browser when you go to surf the web. So I'm left with the puzzle of trying to figure out if I'm in the Matrix or not. Now, it's kind of funny too, because when Neil deGrasse Tyson asks, "Where have you landed?" Professor Gates kind of acts disoriented before he goes into that essential description of what the images are. And he's like, "Why are you asking me that? Da 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 da." And Neil deGrasse Tyson says, he's like, "What do you mean, where am I? Where have I landed?" He goes, "Okay, it's New York, it's March 7th, da 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 da. And remember March 7th, because that's going to be important for later. It's New York, it's March 7th, just trying to orient him. Probably a little tongue-in-cheek, but oh well. So anyway, after Dr. Gates's initial description of browser codes being found in reality, deGrasse Tyson says, "So you're saying you find computer code within the fabric of the cosmos?" And he says, "Into the equations that we want to describe the cosmos." So these are merely descriptive equations. I don't know how many different ways, or how many different ways mathematically you could describe the cosmos. It would lead me to believe that it's possibly one way that you could describe the cosmos in a mathematical equation, or not. I mean, I know it's not like drawing. I know it's a little more objective than all that, but still. And he says computer code, and then Dr. Gates says, "Yes, computer code, strings of bits of ones and zeros." And Neil deGrasse Tyson says it's not just sort of resembles computer code, it is computer code. And then Dr. Gates specifies it's not just computer code, it's a special kind of computer code that was invented by Claude Shannon in the 1940s, buried very deeply into the equations that appear in string theory and in general in systems that we say are supersymmetric. Now, supersymmetry is going to be very important, and we'll get back to that in a minute. But what I found really arresting about this is that he can pinpoint the code, when it was written, and who it was written by in the 1940s. The 1940s, and these pictures look like UFOs from the 1940s. Now, I don't know how long the internet's been around, But it almost feels like what he's saying is that if these are browser codes written by a guy from the 1940s, then the internet's been around way longer than we've thought. Of course, the 1940s is significant too, because you've got Roswell, you've got the anticipated noted advent of computers, as far as I can tell. I mean, I don't know how far back or exactly when the first computer was invented, but that was also around the time that the World's Fair unveiled TV. I think that was more in the 1930s. So if they were unveiling TV in the 1930s, computers could very well have been started to have been invented in the 1940s. But that said, it's just really, really strange. I mean, it's strange that these pictures look like UFOs. And actually, here's another one here. This is his second one, which actually looks much more like a 1980s UFO. It actually reminds me of the Gulf Breeze sightings, this book that I read in the 1980s that came out in the 1980s. That's the book right there, the Gulf Breeze sightings. Ed Walters, he said this UFO came down, and it came down in front of his house. He was watching TV. He went outside. It came down in front of his house. And, this is one of my favorite pictures in there, right there. It came down in front of his house, although that's not that same night. And he smelled all this ammonia coming out of it. And then it tried to take him up and shut him down to the ground. So anyway, after Neil deGrasse Tyson hasn't recovered from this, he basically goes on to say, so you're saying that we're living in the Matrix, that there are codes written into reality that are browser codes, and we're living in the Matrix. And then Gates goes on to say, some of those codes are showing on the screen behind you. Okay, actually no, that's when he jumps forward. This is fascinating. So he basically says that some of the codes are showing on the screen behind you right now. And they don't look like codes, but these pictures we call DCRAs, or graphical representations of sets of equations that are based on codes. And that's interesting, and they do look very symmetrical, and they do look very angular. And they don't necessarily look like anything that describes our reality as I see it or as I know it, particularly at least mathematically. Because when I think of our reality, I think of things like fractals, repeating patterns that expand out on themselves, and Fibonacci sequences, like the things in seashells, the things, basically it's how embryos form, it's how everything from leaves are designed in nature to things in outer space. So I think of things of the natural world as being very swoopy and exponential and curvy. But he's all about the DCRAs. And then he goes on to say that, so my statement is, in the description of our universe, that is a supersymmetrical universe, which we were going to test in the LHC. I don't quite know what that means, but he wants to test it in LHC. If you believe that description, I can show you the presence of these codes. So essentially he says, if you believe the description, I can show you the presence of these codes, the very, very angular supersymmetrical codes that he wants to test at the LHC. And when you look up DCRA symbols here, it basically says in supergravity and supersymmetric representation theory, DCRA symbols are I always want to say geographical, are graphical representations of supersymmetric algebras. Mathematically, they can be described as colored, finite, connected, simple graphs. And And that's what they look like right over here. But then there's another description of DCRA symbols, which I think is really, really interesting. And they look like this. And they look kind of cryptic, kind of things that the elite would use. And as they say, our society is encompassed in signs and symbols. That's how we communicate. It's shorthand for pretty much everything, from grocery stores to geographical locations. And if you read the description of DCRA symbols here, it says DCRA are visual symbols originally created by Akan, the Akan of Ghana, and the Gaiamun Côte d'Ivoire in West Africa that represents concepts or original thoughts. DCRA are used on fabric, walls, pottery, wood carvings, and logos. So it's all very strange, and I don't find these codes to look the least bit like our natural world at all. Now, I know, of course, they're just codes that were probably run through a computer program, but regardless, here's what I want to posit. And this is also in light of the whole March 7th statement. Because if you remember at the video, I said that Neil deGrasse Tyson makes a big deal that it's March 7th. Not a big deal, but he reminds everybody that it's March 7th. So I took the liberty of going online and looking up what happened on March 7th. Important events from this day in history on March 7th. And aside from some very significant, peaceful, and violent things, we find here, bam, USA patent for the telephone. Taking us right very back to the video that I showed you in the beginning. This guy informing us that from the phone's inception, right probably at the start of its patent, that phones were embedded with the capability for surveillance. And that's what I would like to ask Dr. Sylvester about this 1940 code that supposedly he says browser codes for the description of reality are embedded in. And I'm wondering if maybe we haven't gotten it backwards this whole time. Maybe reality codes are actually embedded in computer codes. Reality codes as depicted and as discovered from the 1940s, from the 1940s physicists that wrote them, as they say, or that either discovered them or wrote them. And why would they embed reality codes? Or reality, I would say reality formulas. Why would they embed reality formulas in computers? And why would those codes, if we are in fact living in a matrix, why would those codes have not have self-corrected? Because Dr. Gates does describe browser codes as self-correcting. So why would they not have self-corrected and updated to fit our current reality? Why would they have stayed stuck in the 1940s? That's my big question. And my theory is that it probably has something to do with what we would do with Google, what we would do on things like Wikipedia. Overwrite, erase, modify, edit, and merge. And if you're talking AI, and if you're talking cyberspace and cyber intelligence, that's probably exactly what they saw down the pike. That's probably what they had in mind all along. I mean, a few years ago, there were all these Google barges just parked on the outside of major cities. And they were kind of mysterious, and nobody knew what they were doing there. And one YouTube video maker posited that, well, that's one of the reasons for all these changes in spelling. They've got their overwriter on, they've got their autocorrect on. And that's why we're seeing changes in spelling in reality. But what if it goes further than that? What if they literally are trying to merge cyber reality and objective reality? And what if that's why they're testing it in the LHC? Supersymmetry versus the codes of Fibonacci and fractals. Yeah, I think AI is a lot more sophisticated and subtle than that. Instead of robots walking around, they've got robots infiltrating and interloping on reality through cyberbots. Anyway, just let me know what you guys think. But again, I think instead of browser codes in reality, I think reality codes were embedded in browsers that apparently we didn't know we had all the way back in the 1940s. And that's why it hasn't updated since then. All right, just let me know what you think, and peace out.